My name is Rachael Mattson. I am a second-year master's student at Gallatin with a concentration in political ecology of urban infrastructures. Um, and this summer, I interned in Dakar, Senegal for 3 months with Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing, or WIEGO for short, which is a global action research network that aims to help secure livelihoods of workers in the informal economy, especially women. Oftentimes, urban informal workers are labeled as disposable or insignificant, and their voices are hidden by a lack of recognition or legal protections for their work. In Senegal, WIEGO works with, amongst other groups, they work with waste pickers at one of Africa's largest dumps on the outskirts of Dakar in exploring advocacy efforts and organizational strategies in the face of recent state plans funded by the World Bank to upgrade the dump. Um, this presents a significant threat to waste pickers' livelihoods as it's uncertain what these upgrades include at this point. And while interning with WIEGO, I was simultaneously doing my master's thesis research. I worked closely with a group of women food waste pickers in particular, who are arguably the most marginalized group at the dump due to the nature of their work, working with food and also food waste, and also their status as minority Christian women. And I went into this research project initially, or for the purpose of this fellowship, initially asking the question, in what ways can the language of human rights be used to make claims about the value of informal labor, value in terms of worth, recognition, and dignity, and to protect the livelihoods of workers in the informal economy. And also, I was looking at what are the implications for more inclusive approaches to municipal waste management solutions and international development regimes. Um, More generally, WIEGO's main objectives are to um, help create spaces for consultation and exchange between authorities and informal workers organizations, um, in order to help improve relations, which can lead to more inclusive policies and practices. Also, research and advocacy to better to help better access or to improve access to social protection and public services, developing more inclusive legal frameworks for informal labor by analyzing the existing local regulatory frameworks and administrative law principles, network creation with allied lawyers, informal workers organizations, researchers, and others, and also capacity building. And in Dakar, the Dakar Focal City team focuses on 9 different sectors, and the one I'm focusing on right now is waste pickers. Um, so around 2,000, the number's a little debatable, but around 2,000 waste pickers make a living collecting, sorting, and selling recyclables at the Mbubis garbage dump. However, they are rarely recognized for the really important recycling work that they do. Um, and it's the only recycling work that happens really in Dakar. And often face stigma and poor working conditions, severe health risks, they're criminalized, and there's a lack of social protections. Women have a very strong presence in informal economies of waste picking worldwide, but their positions are often less profitable and more vulnerable. At Mbubis, men often work with the more lucrative materials, such as plastics and metals, and women do as well, but fewer women, while a large group of women tend to be involved in the collection of food waste, which is used as food for raising pigs, and crucial to surrounding markets in the area based on pork, and particularly in the Quartier N'Jago, or the N'Jago neighborhood just outside of the dump. And many women also have greater risks of assault and sexual harassment and physical violence. So plans to upgrade the dump are an effort to capitalize on and valorize the existing systems. However, these were only made possible by the work of the informal reclaimers that have managed it since its creation in the 60s. And they've subsequently formed a formal association called Bokchom. And their livelihoods are undoubtedly at stake, as I said earlier, because the mechanisms through which and the effects of how the upgrade will valorize labor are still unclear. And it's important to contextualize this informal labor as linked to the broader structural inequalities in Dakar, which are shaped by its colonial past, the impacts of strict structural adjustment policies, along with neoliberal development regimes. So informal waste recovery creates a positive externality for the municipality by stimulating local economies, expanding the potential and the capacity of the dump, and by providing jobs. There's been speculation about constructing new infrastructures, including a new compost facility, for example, but jobs for this new facility, it's uncertain, particularly if women waste pickers would have access to them. And oftentimes, what I've found through talking to a lot of people is that some of the a 9 to 5 jobs, for example, would not be as desirable for many who enjoy the flexibility of the informal labor that they engage in. And so it could have huge impacts for neighboring economies as well, as I mentioned, that rely on access to the dump. And so through this research and this internship, I've seen firsthand how livelihoods depend on this work, and it allows people to provide for their families, for themselves, and many have a sense of pride in the honest work that they do, despite the intense stigma that they face. And so this intricate connection between questions of gender and informal labor and created and perceived value lie at the heart of the research that I'm doing. And so I argue that exploiting the informal sector through dispossession doesn't rid the state of its accountability for its citizens, and it doesn't clear them of their obligations to protect the economic and social rights of its people under international rights law or human rights law. WIEGO's goal is not to tell waste pickers what to do, but to accompany workers' organizations to better organize in order to negotiate with authorities and protect their, their way of life. And so when I first went to Dakar, or when I went back to Dakar, it was my third time there. There were a lot of changes happening around the question of organizing. So there had recently been an in-depth study conducted by WIEGO and the University of Cheikh Anta Diop's geography department. On the situation of waste collectors at Mboba. It was a very scoping study and yeah, very well done. And there were multiple actors involved and were present at the presentation of that study. And most importantly, many representatives of waste pickers themselves were included in every step of the process. And the team in Dakar had also recently done a law exposure dialogue program, which highlights the needs to keep reflecting on local laws to see how to better manage these conflicts and spaces between authorities and workers. Along with continuing to support the Association of Bokjom, the waste pickers, some important steps recently have been to include, or have been the increased mobilization of women. And so recently there was the creation of the Association of Women Food Waste Pickers, and I was really excited to find that that had just been created like the month before I got there. And it's exciting because this is the first time that this group had previously, they've never been organized before. So it was really, really interesting timing. And so the question of identity and organizing is really important to better understand the categories of labor and the status of labor that they occupy and what this means. And so part of this is aimed especially at working with women to see how to bring them into the conversation and support them in, making their livelihoods. And so in order to have a more inclusive waste management system, there needs to be inclusion of waste pickers who have a deep material knowledge of this work and various recycling practices. And so thinking longer term about other possible trajectories, I found that organizing is a very powerful way to help to improve working conditions, fight against stigma, and then also to push for more social protection. The dominant approach to advocating for improving conditions in the informal economy is formalization. So, for instance, while I was in Dakar, there was a lot of focus and discussion on the ILO's recommendation 204 concerning the transition from the informal to formal economy. But one critique is that oftentimes formalization can inadvertently be an exclusionary process for those who are already on the margins. And so formalization can take multiple forms, including taxation, organization, representation, registration, etc. And these efforts can and certainly do affect positive changes in many cases. But in order for the benefits of formalization to be evenly distributed, approaches need to be comprehensive in their planning and context specific. And so taking into account the various complexities of groups of informal workers that will be impacted, which is often lacking. And so in dealing with these challenges, WIEGO focused often on the importance of being aware of and observe certain procedural and legal steps that are already in place. And they recognize that, and waste pickers as well recognize that they can't do this without the support of local authorities. On the flip side, authorities need to better understand the situation of the informal economy. So hence the focus on advocacy and improving visibility by strategically framing it within the broader language of national and municipal discourses. So I was lucky to be a part of a partnership between the ILO and WIEGO. That's from both these pictures. That the guy holding up his hands, that's that cracked me up. He was, I worked with him. He was part of one of the two members of the Dakar Focal City team. Um, and so this workshop explored possibilities of organizing waste pickers um, into a cooperative. So this brought together key national institutions involved in waste management, um, including, it was mostly waste pickers, but they also had representatives from the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development, which was very important, the National Program on Waste Management, and a lot of other both local and international organizations. So the workshop allowed flexibility for waste pickers, allowed a certain amount of flexibility for waste pickers to decide appropriate ways of organizing themselves to be more productive and work in more decent conditions. And so the participants were, by the end of the 2-day workshop, the participants were kind of converged around the idea that cooperative approach could be suitable to their needs and their aspirations. And uh, while so just reflecting on the international human rights framework in this particular context, um, while the notion of human rights or labor rights is part of WIEGO's vocabulary as a global network, I was surprised to find that in Dakar, the International Human Rights Framework, or in Dakar, with with the activities I was involved in, it was not directly referenced really much at all. There are obviously obvious connections to be made to these, for example, you know, decent working conditions, social protection, discrimination, child labor, equal access to employment, and dignity. These were all terms that were used, but not within the context or the framework of international human rights. Um, and what was interesting is that this generally took on a different form by framing the issues through the language of the current administration's objectives. So that could be environmental consciousness, such as zero waste programs, citizenship, women's participation, things like that. And also through understanding the local legal framework in order to make more compelling claims to local authorities. And so the International Human Rights Framework provides an emancipatory vocabulary and institutional mechanisms through which people can hold their governments accountable. But there is an undeniable Western bias, and it's important to ask who has access to these international human rights mechanisms. Um, I've spent a lot of time in Senegal before, and throughout my research, and particularly when trying to frame this in terms of human rights, I constantly was aware of my positionality and the privilege that I had as a white American woman, grad student, to just kind of pop into this dump site and talk to workers. And, I got very lucky. People were very open and like very, very inviting and excited to talk. And people graciously just invited me to hang out with them during long days at the dump, invited me into their homes. I spent the night with one waste picker, which is really, really awesome. And uh, just other everyday activities, including activities with WIEGO with my internship. And so that's just including the research side, but also with WIEGO, I wasn't just doing things with waste pickers, but other sectors as well. And so I'm sort of limiting it to the waste pickers for the purpose of this. But I want to be really aware of not speaking for anybody, but rather highlighting the significant mobilization and work going on, because there's a huge risk of co-opting existing activism by the dominance of the international human rights discourse. And so, that can minimize existing ongoing efforts or lead to victimization. And so, as I've discussed, there are obviously challenges to this work, but the work of waste pickers, but people are not one-dimensional victims. Rather, like, many had a lot of pride and were actively engaged in trying to improve their working conditions and advocate for their right to do this work. Claims of neutrality and the focus on individual violations, often deployed by the human rights framework, have the potential to obscure a lot of the structural and deeply political dynamics that could impact trajectories of waste picker livelihoods throughout this upgrade. So basically, I feel that tapping into certain discourses within the international human rights framework could be really beneficial in valorizing and making more visible the experiences of waste picking labor, especially on an international scale. But at the same time, taking a more pragmatic and locally grounded and critically reflected approach that WIEGO has been pushing for can help them to shift power dynamics, mobilize political will and resources, and to open a space for political contestation. So, what's next? I'm going to continue working on my master's thesis research. So I'm kind of writing it now, but I might be continuing to do more research in January. Hopefully, we'll be back there. But I'm also, I've met with people WIEGO members also outside of Dakar, and I'm probably going to be writing maybe some articles for WIEGO at some point. So WIEGO and the Association of Waste Pickers in Dakar are going to continue to work on strengthening the organization or the associations, gaining visibility, improving relations with authorities, and with the support of the ILO, work towards um, forming cooperatives in order to continue to prepare for the uncertainty of the future upgrade. So thank you to Vasuki, Mehmed, the other fellows, and to everyone that made this event possible. Also to the people at WIEGO who graciously hosted me and taught me so much, and to all the waste pickers who welcomed me at Mbubas in Carte and Jago and into their homes and just shared so openly. Also to my advisor, Rosalind Fredericks, and everyone else who continues to support me in this research. So thank you.